really excited to be hosting this gathering today on Penn's campus. And despite the fact that we're in a setting which I guess this is our main steward of ancient cultures here at Penn, what our organization is involved in is really fostering the entrepreneurial spirit among our 2,000 faculty. So the Penn Center for Innovation is a newly launched organization that focuses on early stage technology, commercialization, and working with the private sector to license technology, launch startups, create partnerships, all in the spirit of moving forward these ideas that we're creating here at Penn into the market for both social and economic impact. So it's really exciting to have this gathering here and for us to be a sponsor of Phorum, and in particular, the focus of today's event, which is around technology, big data, and innovation. Those are actually challenges that we face every day as we're trying to engage with all the faculty at Penn who are trying to work on complex commercialization strategies with, and all of the external partners who we're trying to match up with these ideas, again, to foster technology into the marketplace. So again, welcome, really glad to have you here, and I'm very pleased to actually introduce the moderator for this panel, who will then more fully introduce the panel. Merv Adrian, he's the Research Vice President with Gartner, and he follows database, big data, and basically all the related technologies in terms of information in this space. And I know we'll curate a really interesting conversation among this panel. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, I will stand up for a couple minutes because I've got some slides here. I love the way you juxtaposed the ancient with the new. In the database space, I actually represent that juxtaposition myself. I'm an old guy, and I was working on Wall Street a few decades ago when a guy named Chris Date came to town and told us for the first time about this new thing called the relational model, and introduced the RDBMS, which transformed really data management in a way that probably wasn't obvious to a lot of people at the time, but at the time, everything we did with data was done in a one-off fashion. We had files, we wrote programs that worked those files. Somebody else wrote another program that worked that file, and they might do it in a different way. And they could actually change stuff before we got back, and we wouldn't know the difference. The good news about the relational database was it gave us a central point of policy enforcement, definitional management, security and privacy, and it worked really well for several decades and spawned a whole industry of applications that ran off of this engine. Today, we have a whole new way of thinking, and that way is, why don't we write individual programs every time we want to do something and do it however we want to do it? Now, some people think of this as a move ahead. Some of us think it might be fundamentally regressive. So sometimes everything old is new again. And the big data space is probably a good place to actually think about how true that statement is. So let me begin by talking about how data management is changing in a big data world. It's going to be a good lead into what people actually do with this stuff, which is what our panelists will talk about. To begin with, the entire world of managing and using information is being transformed by what Gartner calls a nexus of forces, and it's probably a pretty familiar model to you, even if you haven't seen the Gartner version of it, that social and mobile and cloud are transforming the use of information. And those information systems that I talked about when they began were all about what we would think of today as traditional transactions. I can't get rid of a customer if they have an outstanding balance, that sort of thing. Let's record transactions and keep track of the books and be able to report on it at the end of the quarter or the month or the year. That stuff is still out there, and if you look at the box in the middle of that figure there, you'll see at the bottom transactions. That's what we always did with databases. They require structure in the data that is going to be the same the next time we go back and use it. And they require some rules about how transactions work, and the DBMSs enforce those rules for us. We call those asset properties. And those were good and remain good, and they remain the dominant majority of things that we do with data on these information systems that many of you in this audience are responsible for. And maybe just for a second, can I get a show of hands? How many of the folks in this room are actually from IT? Any IT people here? We got a few of you. Okay, you're surrounded by business people, so watch it. Okay, can I go back to the slide for a second? Thank you. So we have two other kinds of activities these days that we're managing here, and let's see if I can get this laser to work. Whoops, no, wrong button. Hold on, there we go. So we've got things that we call observations. And if you've heard talk about the Internet of Things, of instrumenting the edge, of sensor networks, electric utility meters that phone home, oil rigs that tell us when the pressure's getting too high, or jet engines that tell us it's about time to replace that part before you really have to. That Internet of Things is all about observations. It's a pretty low-order information management problem. We collect a very simple piece of data and we send it somewhere else for processing. Something that looks like, hello world, hello world, hello world, I'm on fire, hello world, hello world. And I want to be able to pull out that I'm on fire when it happens. We can use a completely different data management architecture for that kind of problem. And so here we've identified that as something that's very good for a particular kind of what's called a NoSQL database these days. You probably heard that term, called a key value store, which is exactly what it sounds like. I got a key so I can find it, and then there's some stuff behind it. And it could be anything. And all the interesting things that are done with that data happen in the program. So this is a different kind of data processing. And then there's one other type, and that's up here at the top, and we call that interactions. Interactions are usually characterized by what some people call unstructured data. Anybody who thinks language is unstructured is not paying attention to what's being said, but it's differently structured. And language is what we find in our emails and our documents and our web pages and our Twitter feeds. And there is useful information to be mined there. And again, we use a different kind of structure to work with that. And again, it's one of those NoSQL things. Document databases are the type, and the vendor that you may have heard of is a company called MongoDB, which is all the rage among people who write JavaScript for their websites, and they use something called JavaScript Object Notation, or JSON. Mongo was originally designed as a place to persist the data that we define in JSON. So it's a very natural and attractive place for the programmers who do that stuff to keep their data. So that's how some of this stuff has evolved over recent years, and the transformation of the database business that that's bringing around is making it possible for us to separate systems of record and systems of everyday operation from systems of innovation. And this is where the interesting stuff happens. The new stuff happens at the edge. It always does. And so the enormous amount of data growth that we're all very familiar with, you've seen a million charts like this one, but the important thing to take away from this chart is that this growth is happening overwhelmingly from types of data that are different from the ones that are in the information systems we use today. Some of those ones I talked about, but others. Audio files from your help desk. Medical records that come in as pictures of an MRI. Or like the observational data I talked before, the record of someone's blood chemistry or EKG over some period of time. Most people in an ICU have 100 wires coming out of them, right? If you've ever been in there, they're all hooked up to a lot of different data collectors. And all those things do is show us what's happening in real time. And until very recently, we never did anything with that data until after somebody arrested. Then we went back and looked and said, oh, over here, 2 days ago, there was this change. That kind of backward thinking is the way a lot of BI has worked for many years, and it's not good enough anymore. We need to be able to build predictive models and respond to events that tend to say that thing that we predicted in this model is happening now, or not. And to do that, we need to correlate these different kinds of data. The existing systems for managing information we have today are not designed to do that, and that's why you see all this innovation going on. When Gartner asks people who are engaging in big data activities, and we talk to those people a lot, what it is they want to do with that information, the most important thing they tell us is enhancing the customer experience. There's a couple of reasons why that happens. One of them is the nature of the information as we've been talking about. Another one is that those are the guys who have the budget. The people who deal with customers get a chance to spend the company's money. And quite often today, they're doing so without reference to the guys who are running IT. The database administrators are probably not signed up for this. In fact, IT and procurement may not be signed up for this. There's a guy down in marketing sitting around the corner from that post over there who's got a computer on his desk that's hooked up to the internet. He's downloading stuff you don't know anything about, doing things with a programming language you never heard of, and the company is spending millions of dollars because of what he's doing. Not inside IT, by the way. One of the leading lights of the whole big data movement, one of the early guys on the Hadoop thing, a fellow named Jeff Hammerbacher, once said something that I think is very profound. He said, "The greatest minds of my generation are figuring out how to get people to click on stuff." And there's a lot of money being spent on that, and to track what happened when they did click on that stuff. So the world is moving very aggressively, the IT world, into how do we leverage this? What kind of technology must we use? And we are tracking at Gartner year over year significant rises in people's plans to invest in what they call big data, as per the definition we provide to them as part of the service, which presumably they agree with to some degree. That number keeps going up, and it's important to understand that whenever you look at a forecast from anybody, even someone as authoritative as Gartner, you're looking at the equivalent of kids' letters to Santa Claus. Plans to invest and actual investment often diverge significantly, and just because I've got it in the budget doesn't mean I'm going to spend it, or that when I do I'll find the right solution and I may delay because I haven't. So there are all kinds of reasons why this can't happen, but this trend tells us people want to go there. And I'm going to take a minute and geek out on you guys, so I apologize in advance if your eyes start to glaze over. I'll keep this short. You will hear this term if you haven't already. It's called Hadoop. Hadoop is a processing paradigm for managing very large volumes of data in a distributed environment across a lot of inexpensive nodes. Go out and buy these little server boxes for $5K or less and string a bunch of them together with some wires. And if you need more, just go next door, buy more boxes, and stick more wires in them. That's the paradigm. And it was literally that way in the early days of this. One of the early developer companies, which is still there, leading this charge, was literally sitting next to a company called Fry's, which is the big electronic chain in California. When they say, we can scale this out by going next door and buying some more pizza boxes, they meant it. They literally did, go out in the morning, buy 6 more, and plug them in the afternoon. The way this model works is that you've got this storage manager at the bottom that distributes data across as many of these things as you want to plug in and redistributes it when you need to add more. And there's a resource manager that helps run that whole thing for you so that you can add nodes, take them away, move data around. But all of that is out of the hands of the programmer. This is about creating an abstraction. So the programmer doesn't have to think about the mechanics of parallelism. They just think about the logic and what they want to do with the data. So if I've got a really, really large pile of data about who clicked on my website over the last year, and I want to understand how many of them fit this demographic, looked at this product and made this kind of transaction, I can do that. And that's really where a lot of this started. It was, in fact, all about customers at that stage. Now, the thing to understand when your IT people come to talk to you about this Hadoop thing is that it is a framework. It's not a thing. It's a set of things, and it's a set that constantly changes. These are things that are built in what's called open source software project models. Now, this doesn't mean unicorns and princesses. It means that the people who are paying for this are not necessarily people selling you something. Everybody who builds this stuff is being paid by somebody. And you will hear about the Apache Software Foundation as the steward of the open source software in the Hadoop project, and all that stuff is great. Apache doesn't pay anybody. Everybody who's working on these projects is being paid by somebody else, and they hope to use some of that software themselves, and they're willing to share it with the rest of the community because it advances faster as a result. Other people are looking at this same stuff, helping it improve faster. And this model is fundamentally transforming the economic model of IT. I could spend the next hour just talking about that, but I'm not going to. We do have panelists up here, after all. Most of the commercially available Hadoop distributions, they're called distributions because they are a collection which is distributed and maintained by somebody who you pay for the privilege of having that done for you, contain not only those open source pieces, but some other pieces that vendor has added, partially because customers are asking them for that thing, but partially because it'll help them differentiate and charge extra. All good reasons, right? This is how a company stays in business. And most important, all of this stuff is changing at a very, very high rate of speed. That's one of the key things to understand. Today's Hadoop is as different from last year's Hadoop as next year's Hadoop will be different from today's. And so you need to understand that's always changing. It is still a very early market. This is data that we haven't published yet. It's about to be published, but we have a research panel called the Gartner Research Circle. Think of it as Nielsen for IT. Hundreds, thousands of companies that participate on an annual basis. We surveyed them in the first quarter about their plans to invest in Hadoop. And that big gray slice on the left of that chart is the 54% of them out of a base of nearly 300 who said, nope, not right now, not in the near future, no plans. So when you hear about how Hadoop is taking over the world, go away with this. Gartner told us just the other day that half of the companies they talk to are not doing anything of the sort just yet. That's reality. Now, lots of activity is going on, and the ones who are already playing with it are mostly piloting and experimenting, but a quarter of the ones who are already actually doing something, and there were 145 of them in this particular survey, a quarter of them are actually deployed. That is, they're in production in some fashion. They're not just piloting. That's a pretty good number, but think about it. It's a pretty small number. If we add up the claimed customer numbers of the three major Hadoop distributions, we're talking about 1,500 or 1,600 companies today. So don't be overwhelmingly influenced by the notion that Hadoop is a massive wave taking over the world. It may yet be, but it isn't today. So I'm going to stop there, and we're going to switch from talking about technology and markets to talking about value. I gave you a bit of a hint about what people might do with this stuff, but we have here a set of 5 people who have a lot to say about customer value and what their customers are getting out of this. I'll ask you to raise your hand as I name you, so people will know where you are. They're not in order. This is an unordered, unstructured data set up here. Lars Bjork from Click. Don't put that list down because I won't be able to read it. Thank you. Amita from Pulse Info Frame. Kevin Leininger from IntegraChain. Matt Lesmanis from Glaxo. And Jim Warren from SEI. So I'm going to sit down now, and we're just going to talk. At some point, I'll ask if anybody in the audience wants to ask a question. I'm assuming the mics are live up here, and I know there's one here, and I think there's one in that aisle as well. But give us a couple of minutes to go through a first walkthrough here. And I'm going to start at the far end, and we're going to talk about user stories, case studies, values. What's this all good for? How are you and your customers getting value out of this big data thing?
Great, thanks, Merv. So my name is Matt Lesmanis. I work at GlaxoSmithKline, and something I was reflecting on, actually walking around through the museum today, and even during your presentation, was I've been in life sciences about 14 or 15 years or so, but before that I was actually in a quite different industry. I was in the publishing industry, and around 1999 to 2000, publishing was working through quite a complex business problem. Their entire product set was becoming virtualized, right? So since about the 1400s, the publishing industry hadn't really gone through a real technological innovation like that, and their products were going from paper-bound to electronic, and that shift was really, really disruptive. And part of what we were trying to figure out was, how do you address that shift, and how do you move from this kind of piloting incubation stage to something you knew was going to work, but you didn't know exactly when it was going to work or what value it was going to deliver, and how do you navigate those kind of waters? And I think the companies that did that well, got a lot of value for for their customers out of that, and the ones that did it less well, might have taken a different track. So, that was a big shift in publishing, and obviously today, you have firms that are producing these kinds of products, and they're far outstripping, traditional book product sales globally at this point. And that was only over the course of about 10 years or so. And I think if your slide around big data was really instructive, because you hear a lot about it, but what is it really, and how do you utilize it, and what are the technologies behind it? And I think, when I get involved in discussions like this, or I go to different conferences and panels, I think the question isn't so much about the technology, it's about what business problem are you trying to address. And three kind of lessons I've learned over the years is, you kind of want to first align on that business problem definition. What is that thing you're trying to do? And then really laser focused in on the scope of that thing. And then figure out, are you leveraging the right technology that gives the right scale for what you're trying to address? And I think if you kind of do those three things well, you tend to navigate the kind of uncertain technology waters better than if you just kind of do a lot of piloting and sort of experiment forever. So I think alignment, focus, scalability are probably the three things I've learned over the course of my career, kind of navigating the complex waters of technological change, whether it's in publishing or the big data challenge or digital type changes. So it's kind of what I've learned over the years.
And now for something completely different. Let's go from pharma to the financial world.
Sure. I'm Jim Warren. I work at SEI. We're a financial services company. We have a lot of different units. The division I work in provides outsourcing, both technology and operational outsourcing to hedge funds and investment managers. And we've been doing this for a long period of time. And really what we're doing is we're hosting a lot of the data that's processed for our clients and their clients, their investors. So we've aggregated lots and lots of data for hundreds of clients about what they're managing each day, the firm themselves, and their investors. And as our services have built out, the breadth of our data that we're aggregating has grown. But I think one of the things, Merv's presentation was good as it relates to us as well. We're in the kind of experimenting, piloting things out stage. And one of the reasons we're doing this is we're realizing that we have a large breadth of data that is very meaningful to our clients in how they run their business, how do they analyze what has happened. But they're really coming to us and trying to have us help them figure out how they can predict what is going to happen. So that is everything from, are there different analytical tools that we can utilize to help them do this? But more so, what additional data points can they capture to help them make those decisions? And big data is big. So we don't want to just grab every piece of data out there. So what we're trying to do is figure out what things are meaningful, where's correlation, and there's ways that our clients can get smarter about their business, about their investments, and about their investors. So we're at that stage where we're trying to figure which of these technologies make the most sense for us and our clients.
And of course, that can change from one day to the next.
Yes.
Which is another intriguing dimension. But
we were having a discussion over lunch, and we were saying that we did a test where we spent about 2 months on something, and then we went away from it for 6 months, and then we came back to it, and we realized how dramatically it had changed. And I think that's the technology that's there, is we're seeing very significant change from time to time.
We'll probably talk a little bit more about that, but let's keep going.
Thanks, Kevin Leininger. I actually met Edgar Codd, so I can one up your Chris Gates
Ted.
story if anybody knows who. The founder of the relational model thing called the tuple. He's a mathematician, but anyway. So I run a company actually headquartered here in Philadelphia, and we run sort of the largest cloud in U.S. commercial healthcare process channel data. So census scale, about $200 billion worth of commerce last year, about 1.5 billion transactions. So I'll give you a couple of kind of user stories, because you think about our customers are healthcare manufacturers. Their customers are typically, they can be wholesalers and distributors, but ultimately it's all of us as consumers of healthcare products, be they branded pharmaceutical products or generics or over-the-counter products. So about 6 or 7 years ago, there have been some really, really big changes. Some of the guys up here understand that pretty well. One of the consequences of all the changes of the move towards generics and things in the U.S. channel is a rapid reduction in inventories in the forward distribution channel in pharma. And what that's caused is that's caused a whole series of service level problems around the ability to get product to patient. So as a consequence of a lot of this stuff, they've changed their contracting strategies, and now there's a whole bunch of data, daily point of sale, daily inventory information, purchase order data, and all kinds of data streams are flowing into the tunes of hundreds of millions of transactions a year for a large manufacturer. What are they to do with all this data, right? It's a real challenge for them internally, given their infrastructures and their challenges. So there's a couple of things that they're doing. We were asked to talk about kind of where you can benefit the customer. I would like to say there's two examples that jump to my mind. The first is that what they're starting to do with this data is put it in memory and mine it and watch daily inventory positions around about 350,000 points of care in the United States. So you're not going to really do that with a spreadsheet and a relational database, right? So they do that using cloud technologies, and they watch this stuff, and they run real-time sensing and signaling on the data for inventory positions in groups like trade relations groups, commercial operations groups inside of these manufacturers. And we have customers who've taken sort of service levels from 96.5% to 97% to about 98.5% to 99% in terms of avoiding those stockouts, right? That translates to many, many millions of dollars to their bottom line, but it also translates to a better customer experience, right? Because as the world moves from branded pharma, oral-based products where you go to CVS, you fill it, you go home. If it's not there Thursday night, you go in Friday morning and it's there. Now it's rheumatoid arthritis, cancer drugs, all kinds of specialty drugs that are often infused. So when you go to a facility and the product's not there, the consequences of a stock out in the demand channel are much, much higher. So the industry is really struggling with how do we do that. We've got now good example customers who are using that data on a daily business, what we call daily business use case process to actually contact downstream people and have them move an inventory around proactively. The second example I'll give relates to predictive analytics. And what we're seeing now is finally a move towards much more of what's kind of historically been called a CPFR, collaborative planning, forecasting, replenishment kind of metaphor, where there's a lot more collaboration going on between the manufacturer and its downstream trading partner. Well, to do that, they need to run predictive models, and they need to begin to understand what they should be doing in the channel, not just what did they do, using databases, using queries, using visualizations, using reports, but building predictive models. We actually have deployed Hadoop in production, and we do about 6 billion computations in a 4-hour window on our Hadoop clusters. And what we're doing is we're taking hundreds of SKUs, we're running order plans, 13-week daily running forward order plans on about 65,000 points of care on 150 SKUs, 12 different forecasting models. We then score all the models, and the bottom line in all that is you get one model that wins, it comes back in. The customer service teams, the trade relations teams, the supply chain management teams at these companies are viewing those models every day, and they're looking at what do we expect coming from our trade partners tomorrow? What's McKesson going to order tomorrow? What's CVS going to order next week? So they can begin to plan ahead. We've seen this start to come into vogue in the industry, and what you're seeing now is a move up again in that service level. That's obviously great for customers because now it's cliche, but it's becoming more and more true with the use of all this data. Right product, right place, right time. And I think there's real benefits that are actually being realized now by some of these healthcare manufacturers using this data.
So a lot of threads there in our first three presenters here, talking about what Gartner tends to refer to when we define big data as volume, variety, velocity. All three of those have figured in to some degree in all of the stories. But then the big question is, of course, how do I do something with this? I mean, okay, somebody's put this together. What sort of tools am I going to put in front of this to build those models, to do the visualizations? And I suspect Lars has a few things to say about that.
I do, thank you. So Lars Bjork, CEO of Click. We are a vendor in this space. We live, breed big data every day. So what is it we do? Well, we take all that data that a lot of people have talked about and turn it into insightful information, regardless of where it comes from, regardless of how many data sources you want to combine. And we are focused on one thing, making it really simple to use. Because I have a strong belief, if it's not simple to use, it simply won't be used. That's the consumerization wave that we just have to accept is out there. And I'm probably going to criticize the industry a little bit and my fellow panelists just to get it going here. we talk too much about geeky terms. Forget all about that. That's not important to you guys. It's the outcome that some of these guys have touched on that's the important stuff. That's why I think big data is really not interesting. It's the output of the big data. Let's not focus on those two words. Let's focus on the examples as we are going to talk about. So we have 34,000 clients. So I thought about what would be an appropriate customer that you all can relate to. And I'm pretty sure the use case that I'm going to present, everyone in this room knows about. You either use it, participate in it, or have a family member that does. Does anyone know about Candy Crush Saga? So the company behind it is King.com. They do run a big Hadoop cluster, technical term, but for me, it's just a place where you store data cheap. That's what it is. Forget about the other technical stuff. They run Qlik's products on top of it for 190 million players every second. So when your daughter or your son is playing, they can monitor what level they are in the game and appropriately send them alerts so that they come and ask you for the credit card so they can buy themselves to the next level. You should blame me and us for that. That's a great example of big data in real time as well. I have lots of other examples, but I wanted to pick one which you could relate to, and you might not think about that this is happening in the background.
Thank you for making the world a better place. But let's take it to the other extreme. Sometimes it's not about big, and I know you'd like to say a few words about that.
Right, thank you. So my name is Famita Gwadri Sridhar. I'm co-founder and now CEO of Pulse InfoFrame. We're based in Philadelphia. What Pulse does is we offer our customers a cloud-based healthcare technology platform that really gives them the opportunity to participate in the two revolutions that we're seeing today. And those two revolutions are biotechnology and informatics. What Pulse has done is essentially created a new ecosystem of configurable networks that support healthcare specialists and their patients, allowing the opportunity to collect unique patient data real time. And what we're doing is moving away from this big data play where we're looking at volumes of data that just tells us what's going on. And we're really focused on the outcomes of importance. In other words, actionable little data that tells us why things are going on. And so essentially moving from volume to value. In my use case, I'm going to tell you about a local person, Darren Sudman. Darren Sudman from Philadelphia started a group called Simon's Fund. More than 7 years ago, Darren lost a baby, Simon, who didn't wake up from a nap. And initially they thought that the baby had passed away from SIDS. And what they discovered after some additional testing is in fact his wife Phyllis suffered from a genetic abnormality and had long QT syndrome, essentially an abnormality in the heart. He made it his life's passion to help people understand what can happen when you have a heart condition. And he started to collect data, bringing together cardiologists and different specialists, essentially to screen kids who might be at risk for sudden cardiac death, starting originally in the inner cities of Pennsylvania. And he came to us a couple of years ago. He had collected 100,000 ECGs, bits and pieces of paper on screening, and Excel spreadsheets that were too big to describe. And he asked us to help him create an application that he could deploy real time and bring these kids in and screen them. And we did that for him. He was featured in the Inquirer on CNN. He's well known in the community, supported by the Eagles and the Phillies. But what it really showed him is that his vision, not only to educate people, but collect data in a meaningful way that can ultimately be used to save lives. So he's moving this program now from Philadelphia into a national program around the country, but really then about using that data to engage the research, to come up with the predictive modeling, to come up with the visualization tools that help the consumer, that being the patient, or hopefully not a patient, but a kid who wants to understand more about heart disease, and ultimately also supporting people in academic institutions like this who want to do additional research. So that's one of the use cases we have.
It's a great story. And it's perhaps an accident of circumstance that there's so much healthcare on this panel, but I think it helps us focus on value. What could be more important than getting these things right? And you said small, but we don't get to build predictive models unless we collect a lot of data. And in terms of figuring out which data is meaningful and which isn't, we often don't know that until we test. The process of model building is one of iteration. We build a model, we add some data, we see how well it predicts, we figure out a couple of other data sources to plug into the model, see if they improve its predictive capability. We iterate, and we iterate, and we scale. And you heard cloud a lot here. One of the reasons a lot of that stuff gets done in the cloud is because, well, most of the people who want to do that iteration and want to do the complex mathematics, it doesn't always get to be as simple as Lars would like it to be. Those people have to have resources available to them. And they may need them for 5 minutes. And they may not need them again for another month. And then they'll only need them for 5 minutes again. So the cloud has provided a terrific metaphor. So where I'd like to take this next stage of the conversation is how much do you see the value of additional new types of data in the kinds of solutions that your customers are dealing with? Things that we call them dark data at Gartner because they often have been lying around unused for a long time. And Lars, I saw you raise your hand. Go for it.
I think we see an enormous benefit here. Again, we are living in a world where we are going to have twice as much data every second year now. But not only is it going to be more data, it's going to be much more diverse. That's what Merv showed before. And I think the interesting thing is, how can you pull all the data out of your transactional systems, referred to as structured data, and combine it with whatever elements of unstructured data? And by the way, there is no such thing as unstructured data. It's data that is structured and data that is about to be structured. It might be unstructured. You can't read unstructured data. You have to structure it to read it. But it's just a term that's used that way. Take an example. We work with the largest retailers in this country. If they don't have the sentiment data out of social media, there is no way they are going to be spot on predicting what goods are the best to sell tomorrow, pending weather, pending an outcome of a sports event or something. You should probably sell golf equipment this week. Let's be very clear, after the Masters. That type you can pick up by combining data sources. And it's just going to get richer and more diverse. But the important thing I want to leave you with, you touched on it, Merv, here as well. You might not, at the outset of building an application in this area, get it right the first time. Don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. If you are on a modern platform, it will have the agility and flexibility for you to fail quickly, meaning you learn from your mistake, build a new one. The old ancient models of software companies 10, 15 years ago, where you had to spend 9 months to build a data warehouse and then a cube, forget about it. You've moved on to a new employer in 9 months. It's got to take a day or two. You will never nail it the first time because you don't have the knowledge. You will learn. It will be a journey. Pick something that will take you on the furthest journey.
Agree. And it doesn't have to be a failure.
No.
I like to tell people that the kinds of additions of sentiment analysis to retail systems often begin with a point of sale system, which is a perfectly good system. It just happens to be one for financial transactions. So it's there to update the books when you buy something. It records that on this date at this time you bought this thing for that much with this credit card, and it works. It's great. Now, the fact that I was on your website last night looking at the alternatives, or that I talked to some of my friends on Facebook about what they were doing, or even that there was a stack of those things next to the cash register with a giant 30% off sign on them, I may be able to know all those things, but I typically don't. It's until I put those pieces together, I don't get that additive value. Kevin, I imagine many of the things that you guys put together begin with systems that individually are already doing something useful, they become more valuable in,
Yeah,
combination.
I think that's right. I think, one of the things, I think you had mentioned, the advent of the relational model, I think unlocked a lot of value. I think it's now one of the greatest constraints that we have
Yes.
in trying to unlock value in data. Because if you look at our company, for example, we are, all the time, if you think about the forward distribution channel of a healthcare manufacturer, for example, talk about weather,
Yep.
right? How am I going to predict demand for sunscreen if it's going to rain all next week? You think it's going to be higher or lower? I mean, conceptually, right? So that data is to Lars's point, it may not be structured, it may not be unstructured, but it's there. My inability to take that data and shove it in without adding dimensions to my facts and dimensions table and all the nonsense that I have to do is a huge constraint. And that's why I tell people, I really think that a lot of this new technology that's out there now, be it Hadoop, be it the key value stores, be it a lot of these other things that are going on, are really going to open up rich opportunities for analytics and insight that we've never had before. Now, the ability to visualize it, for example, what Click does, I think is fantastic. There's a lot of plumbing work that's really, really hard to do right now, but I think it's starting to change. It's the biggest constraint we have to unlocking value.
Skills. Yeah. Please.
So maybe I can use an example from healthcare. I'm going to use a disease. You asked about new data and the value of new data coming in. We build melanoma registries, so we have one of the largest registries in the world. 10 years ago, nobody was really looking at melanoma because there weren't a lot of new treatments. Today, you have new treatments, you have new genomic information, you have immuno-oncology moving so quickly that unless you're able to bring new data in very quickly into your platforms, you're not able to really move ahead with treatment, and you're not able to use the predictive modeling for targeting, because essentially what you're doing is you're able to now, with new data, assuming it's biologically plausible, because that's the proviso, data, you'll find correlations if you look hard enough. This is really about bringing in data that you are ultimately going to be able to use for predictive modeling, for pricing reimbursement, for improving quality of life and quality of survivorship.
Sure. Or even treatment design. Yeah.
Treatment design.
Yeah, I was going to share a story. You got me triggered on something here, and so did Kevin on sentiment data. We have a great story about how the police in Sweden managed to capture a serial sniper and serial killer using our software. And what they've never done before is take all those observations from the public and other points of observation and put it into a model and started to correlate which people had been in the same place often enough where there might be a trend or a correlation, which usually takes them 3 months, and then the criminal is far gone. This person shot 20 people. It was pretty scary. One person only died, thank God. Others were hurt. And it took them 30 minutes in our software. And they found a guy, nailed him, and he's locked away now. So it's a great story about, again, same thing, many different data sources, sentiment data from the actual public coming in, very traditional way of working, and you're turning it upside down 180 degrees. What if we used a piece of software rather than reading reports?
Jim, I imagine you've got some examples of correlations in the financial space that were unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you mentioned, the idea that the data is going to change, and I think that's the whole purpose of this, right? And that's why it's appealing, is that I can know that there's some factors that are driving investors' decisions to move from one strategy to the next at this time, but there could be something that happens a year from now or 2 years from now that's completely new and a different input, whether we now have a new method of getting that input or whether it's just that something has changed to cause that. And that's the great appeal for us towards this type of analytical technology, because it doesn't lock you into the old ways of thinking. And the old ways of thinking where if I have successful investment performance and I market myself well, people will come to me. But I need to find a way to go to those people and have our clients go to those people. And these ways of seeing whether it's sentiment or whether there's new factors out there that are driving these correlations, that's what's really appealing to us in the whole process.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at is yet another way that we have learned to use automation to improve processes many times that we've been doing for a long time. And the process I'm thinking about here is hypothesis generation. You know, it used to only happen when somebody woke up in the middle of the night with a great idea. We actually have mechanical ways to run barefoot through all this old data and see where we stub our toe, right? You can't build a predictive model based on pattern recognition until you find the pattern. And one of the reasons that, you'll pardon me, big data helps here is because we actually have a lot of it. We've got it sitting there. It may be unused. It's only there because the auditors told us to keep it, or the regulators told us to keep it, or because we just always copied it to tape. But we may be able to go back and look and say, you know, there's something interesting here. Every time these three things happen, you know, this outcome results. And let's prove that to ourselves. That's one of the classic big data use cases, is identifying a pattern and then seeking it out to see whether in fact this pattern predicts that outcome. And once we know that, then we can think about what we can do about it. I've seen a similar healthcare example using visualization technology, which I know you guys are big fans of, going back over old cancer data and looking at genomic data and combining them and discovering somebody in this group was immune to this particular problem, and it turns out it's associated with this genome, and we can do gene therapy here. And that was 15-year-old data in the case I was aware of.
We have a case like that in Germany. 5 regional cancer clinics take their data, and as Merv said, benchmark it against the country's data on breast cancer. And now they can detect breast cancer quicker, and you can have a more gentler treatment or no treatment at all. And it's all about using the big information as a solid benchmark or reference point and saving lives.
I like to tell people data is the gift that keeps on giving. Right? 'Cause, you know, we may have originally captured it for some reason, but we get to use it for something else later on, often unanticipated. Let me open it up here to the audience. We'd love to have some questions from you for our panelists, if anybody
But we
has
don't
one.
see anything, so...
Yeah, it's a little hard to see you, but somebody get up and come to the microphone and ask us a question. I mean, I'm happy to keep asking them, but anybody? Come on, don't be shy. All right, the chair hearing no objections. I will ask another question. So we talked briefly about skills. Let's talk about that. Let's start all the way down at the far end. Where do you find the people who can do this stuff for you?
I think, you know, the skills question is really critical because, as you mentioned, I think big data, small data, data itself, it's about use cases. Somebody mentioned use cases. That keeps going back to my base principle that you need to understand what question you're trying to answer, and that'll largely drive the rest of your exploration. I think it's easy to get lost in the different technology trends and hype on various things, but you really need to think about what use case am I trying to solve for? And that's a hard part, right? But then another hard part is, well, even if we had that capability, do we know how to use it? Do we have folks with the right skill sets and the right talents? And you know, I have 2 young kids at home, and I'm trying to think about what's the future look like for them. And I think to a certain degree, it could look like building up your analytical skills to understand how to not only understand use cases of this kind of technology, but also how to execute them efficiently and derive insight from them. And I think, you know, firms, when they think about these kinds of problems, yeah, they have to think about the technology, but they need to think about the process use cases, and they need to think about the people skills and kind of analytical maturity that you need to have to really make the right use of these kinds of tools. So that's how I kind of frame the issue of capability and skills in this space.
Well, it's nice when the tool helps us, right? When we sit down and we're doing a certain kind of analysis and the tool says, use one of these covariate algorithms, right? And the challenge is, of course, does the person using it even know what that means? And do they have to? I mean, your point about simplicity, Lars, I think is vital. We are a relatively innumerate society. We don't have the non-technical analytic skills in enough volume to tackle some of the problems that we're talking about here. Creating a really good, successful big data solution takes a village, right? We need somebody who understands the business problem well enough to think about it, somebody who understands the math to think about how to tackle the problem, and then somebody technical to implement it. Where can tools help? And I know you want to...
No, and I was going to hook on. I totally agree. I don't think you should focus on technology. First of all, I think modern technology is simple enough. where you are going to run very quickly into something else, which you touched on. What's the data I want? What do I want to do with the data? And again, you are never going to nail it 100% first time out. It's impossible. You've never been in this land that you're moving into. That's why you should choose a modern platform that's agile and flexible. Agility and flexibility, super important, because you are going to reiterate and build more and more. If I come back and speak to you in 2 years and you all went home and built something, it will be significantly more complex and more advanced 2 years from now, because you have gone on a journey. So the important thing is start. Just start something.
So I really believe that you need to give people who are using the data the tools to do what they need to with the data. We've spent too many years collecting data. You know, if you worked in the financial industry and you collected data and you had no idea what to do with it, or you had 5 bank accounts and you had no idea how much money you had in each account, we'd be frightened. But we do that in healthcare a lot. So I really, what we've done is actually put the analytic tools in the end user interface. So you should be able to mine the data, look at the data, understand the data, visualize the data at your fingertips. There's a different skill set, obviously, in building those algorithms, but I think there's a bigger issue, which probably starts with, I was reading in the Financial Times recently, that we've been so focused on educating people in the STEM programs, science, engineering, that even the engineering schools haven't fully adapted to the needs of today, so that you have engineers graduating who really can't find jobs because the academic industry has not been responsive to the technology movement.
There's a long history of academic and industrial partnership that seems to have fallen away a little bit. Washington University in St. Louis a couple of decades ago was an extraordinary example of a school that was literally built by the local industrialists going to a university and saying, we need people who know how to do this, this, and this, and you're not producing any. We'll fund building this program for you. That's happening in patches, but I completely agree with you. I think there's a revolution underway that we're not.
Yeah, I would say actually it's happening just a few blocks from here at Drexel. Full disclosure, I have one child who somehow got in there. I'm not sure how, but he did, and he's still there, so that's good. But what's interesting and what we're doing with them is we take interns, and we'll take 2 to 4 interns every 6 months. And we keep rotating them through, and my goal is to kind of offer half of them jobs if I can, maybe more if I like them all. And I think it's a great opportunity for us. They come in, and I've got 2 software engineers sitting in our office over here at 17th and JFK, both computer science, computer engineering majors, banging away on our Hadoop clusters, writing Python, doing all the kind of techie, geeky stuff, right? But most importantly, they're looking to how to build predictive models, right, to help our customers do a better job of thinking what's going to happen in their channels, right? We're going to feed those kids right back into those universities. They're going to talk to their peers. I think there's a lot of untapped potential in the universities, not just here, but obviously in all the cities. And I think, frankly, as businesses, we need to do a better job of working with those guys and helping them to build. There's a lot of smart kids, right around this place, and they just need to be given the opportunity to come in and do some of the work. So we're pretty committed to doing
So
that.
I know I'm here in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, with a really interesting burgeoning community, and that's what we're here to talk about, is the facilitation of innovation in this community. I'll put in an ad for California for a moment, for Silicon Valley, where I live. It's not an accident that we have what's going on over there, because the things you're talking about are part of the culture. Kids come out of these schools, or they're still in these schools with bright ideas. There's a bunch of people there ready to provide funds. Much stuff comes out of academia and gets commercialized. I mean, that's a very, very healthy environment. And the more you folks here locally can learn how to tap into those engines of innovation and productivity, the better. And it's a self-reinforcing. You get a network effect. The interesting thing for me about what you were just speaking about is how all of those kids who are writing Python or whatever they're talking to one another on the internet.
Absolutely.
The open source community is the most extraordinary phenomenon. Imagine yourself in Florence during the Renaissance, or in Paris in the 1920s. There are these moments in time where communities form in the arts, in science, and a bunch of people come together and they all collectively innovate. What the internet and social networking in the technology community have done is they've created a global community like that. It's like a worldwide salon for technical innovation, and it's an extraordinary thing if you can tap into it. We haven't yet begun to understand the economic impacts of it that are going to gore a lot of our oxes, but it's changing a lot. I'm going to throw it out to the audience one more time. Pardon me for holding up my hands.
Question?
Yes, please, come to the microphone.
Can you, the panel, just comment on what they think the trend might be in terms of data collection and the use of it relative to sensors, radio frequency identification, and the Internet of Things? Those take this into a whole nother realm in terms of collection and potential, so I wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
So specifically RFID and an IoT, Internet of Things
Yeah,
stuff, or?
the collection of data automatically
Yep, okay.
from things versus via humans takes it into a whole nother realm. And
Okay.
I was wondering if there was some thoughts on the panel how that might be leveraged. And
I'm sure several of our
You mean when we
panelists
have a chip under our skin rather than wear it on our wrist?
that's one of them.
sign me up. Yeah.
And particularly with healthcare, with medical processes being monitored.
Logistics
automatically and-
networks,
yeah,
though, right? Many, please, you guys.
No, I mean, I'm sure everybody has something to say, but I'll say if you look at the way we're analyzing demand forecasts and order plans today, you're going to look at it in 4 or 5 years and say it was rather archaic, right? We're using commerce data, with 3-hour delays and things like to analyze things. Why is it that I can't have sensors sitting around all the place, sensors on all the physical distribution, the trucks and so forth and so on, to be monitoring that in real time? Well, there have been reasons that we haven't been able to do that technologically, but those barriers are rapidly falling. So I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of machine data. Now, the problem with that, though, is now you've got a tremendous amount of data. So now you start to get into things like machine learning and a lot of this kind of stuff that you need to process that kind of data. There you run into a skills mismatch again, right? Because there aren't a lot of people who sit around here and talk about k-means clustering, and again, so I start to geek out a little bit here, but some of the really interesting stuff. But that work is underway, and that will happen. You're going to see a massive transformation in the healthcare distribution channel in the next 10 years.
Think about, I'll come back. Think about this as phase one, though, because right now we're just talking about there's a thing out there, it's instrumented, it's sending data back, and back home we're doing something with it. Here's when it gets really interesting. They're going to get a little bit smarter, and they're going to talk to each other. And the logistics network will talk to the warehouse. Right. It won't have to come back here for somebody else to send them out. I've got time for one more comment on this topic, and then, unfortunately, we're out of time. So I know you had...
So maybe I can just comment on the body sensors. We have a large grant right now actually looking at that very issue. So body sensors in the home, trying to keep people out of hospital, streaming that data, using Bluetooth also in the home, looking at conditions such as heart failure, where it's key that you keep people out of hospital. So using data that both is collected in the home as well as data that streams in from other areas, for example, in the smart home types of environments, that's happening now. There's a lot of research going on globally. And just to end on one note, everybody runs around with a Fitbit, so you're talking about, where we're going with this. All of that data is coming in, it's tying into other applications that are hopefully ultimately going to change your behavior.
Amen. And Lars, I know you wanted to say something.
I want to ask
so
a
I'm gonna
question
go 1
to the
minute
audience,
later.
a very, very different question. I want to get a laugh out of the audience. So you listen to us so-called experts talk about big data and technology trends. Can somebody explain to me the rocket science behind fixing potholes in Pennsylvania? Guys, seriously.
What a great note to end on. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
They don't have them in Sweden?
Thanks, everybody.
We fixed them. We fixed them right away.
Well
Of course
done.
you do.
Thank you.